The title of House of the Dragon's third episode of Season 3, Rhaenyra Triumphant, is a piece of deliberate irony. After a season that opened with the Battle of the Gullet and the death of Jacaerys Velaryon, Rhaenyra Targaryen has at last taken King's Landing and seated herself on the Iron Throne. By every conventional measure of the Dance of the Dragons, she has won. Yet the episode, which aired on July 5th, 2026, spends its entire runtime demonstrating that the triumph of its title is a mirage. Winning a throne, it argues, is not the same as ruling from one, and the crown Rhaenyra spent 2 seasons pursuing may be the very thing that destroys her. Structurally, the episode is the boldest experiment the series has yet attempted, and understanding why it works requires remembering how this show usually operates. House of the Dragon has always been an ensemble machine. Its episodes conventionally cut between camps and castles, between the Blacks and the Greens, between King's Landing and Dragonstone and Old Town, balancing a dozen perspectives so that the audience always knows more than any single character does. That structure has served the show's chess game plotting well, but it has also kept viewers at a strategic remove. We have watched the Dance of the Dragons the way a maester might read about it in a history from above, with the full board visible. This episode discards that vantage entirely. With the exception of one crucial excursion, it locks its perspective to Rhaenyra and refuses to leave her side for the full hour, producing what several critics have already called the moodiest and most singularly character-driven episode in the show's run. The decision transforms the audience's relationship to the new queen in ways that no amount of conventional cross-cutting could achieve. We do not observe Rhaenyra's first days of rule from a safe narrative distance, we are sealed inside them with her. Every slight lands on us as it lands on her. Every whispered doubt in a corridor, every hesitation from a counselor, every scratch and skitter of rats behind the walls of the Red Keep registers at the pitch she hears it. Information arrives when it arrives for Rhaenyra, which means the audience is stripped of its usual omniscience and made to share her blind spots, a formal choice whose consequences detonate in the episode's final minutes. The form becomes the argument. Power isolates. The view from the throne is claustrophobic, and a queen who cannot see beyond her own walls is a queen who can be deceived. It is the kind of perspective-locked storytelling that television rarely risks in a franchise this large, and it recalls the best bottle-adjacent hours of prestige drama in which a show pauses its plot machinery to find out what its central character is actually made of. What this episode finds inside Rhaenyra is not reassuring. There is also a quieter structural intelligence at work in the timing of the experiment. The show could have attempted an hour like this at any point, but it chose the moment immediately after victory, the moment when, by the logic of conventional storytelling, the tension should be draining out of the season. Instead of letting the capture of King's Landing function as a climax, the episode treats it as an inciting incident, and the perspective lock is what makes that inversion legible. Seen from outside, Rhaenyra's first days as queen would look like administration, audiences, petitions, appointments, the unglamorous machinery of a new regime settling in. Seen from inside, the same days are an ordeal, and the gap between those two views, between how the court sees its queen and how the queen experiences her court, is where the episode lives. Within that claustrophobia, the hour charts an unraveling that is all the more unsettling for how quiet it is. Nothing in King's Landing goes the way Rhaenyra wants, and the episode is patient, almost cruel, in cataloging the accumulation of small failures. She is grieving Jace, the son and heir whose death at the Gullet hangs over every scene she plays, and the show is wise enough to understand that grief does not announce itself in speeches. It shows up in the beat too long she takes before answering a question, in the way ordinary business seems to reach her from a great distance, in flashes of temper directed at targets that have not earned them. Grief is a poor foundation for statecraft, and Rhaenyra is being asked to build an entire government on top of it. Around that private wound, public anxieties multiply. Alisa's sons remain loose and unaccounted for, Aemon somewhere beyond the city with Vhagar, a threat she can neither locate nor strike at, and the not knowing corrodes her more effectively than any open battle could. A crown that was won by dragons turns out to be useless against absences, and then there are the rats. The infestation spreading through the Red Keep is the episode's central symbol, and the show wields it with an insistence that stops just short of the surreal. The vermin in the walls are the rot in her reign made literal, small, scurrying problems that no dragon can burn away, multiplying in the dark while the queen sits above them on a chair made of melted swords. The rats cannot be parleyed with, cannot be executed, cannot be intimidated into bending the knee. They simply persist, and their persistence mocks the entire vocabulary of power that Rhaenyra has spent her life learning. There is something almost Shakespearean in the conceit, the ruler tormented not by armies but by an infestation, the body of the castle turning against its new occupant, and the episode leans into that register, filling its corridors with shadows and its soundscape with the suggestion of movement just out of sight. Whether the rats are as numerous as Rhaenyra believes, or whether her perception has begun to outrun reality, is a question the episode pointedly declines to settle. That ambiguity is the point. The stress of power, the paranoia of unseen enemies, and the undertow of loss combine to show just how fragile the Queen's grip on her own mind has become. The woman who fought a war to prove she could rule is, in her very first days of ruling, cracking at the seams, and because the episode never leaves her perspective, we cannot be entirely certain which of the threats pressing in on her are real and which are the products of a mind under siege. Few shows would dare to make their protagonist this unreliable this quickly, and it is to the episode's enormous credit that Rhaenyra's deterioration never plays as a betrayal of the character. It plays as the logical consequence of everything she has survived and everything she has done to survive it. The episode is also careful to show that her deterioration has a political dimension, not merely a psychological one. A court reads its ruler the way sailors read weather, and every crack Rhaenyra shows in private is registered, measured, and repeated by the people around her. Servants exchange glances, counselors soften their reports, the men who bent the knee a week ago begin to calculate how firmly it is worth staying bent. Madness in a monarch is never only a private tragedy, it is an invitation, and the episode lets us feel the court's confidence in its new queen eroding in real time, one hesitation and one outburst at a time. Rhaenyra seems to sense this too, which only tightens the spiral. Aware that she is being watched for weakness, she performs strength she does not feel, and the performance costs her the little composure she has left. If the rats represent the invisible threats, Rhaenyra's own allies supply the visible ones, and the episode's sharpest scenes are the ones in which her coalition begins to show its fractures. The most bruising confrontation belongs to Corlys Velaryon. The sea snake comes to his queen with a request that is, on its face, modest and even reasonable. He asks her to legitimize his sons, Alan and Adam, the dragon seeds whose service has been indispensable to her cause. Rhaenyra refuses, and her refusal is politically defensible, arguably even correct. She cannot open the question of legitimacy without opening it against herself, for the legitimacy of her own line is the loose thread on which her enemies have been pulling since before the war began. To grant Corlys what he asks would be to concede that legitimacy is a thing queens may dispense at will, and every lord in Westeros would immediately ask why the same generosity should not expose the parentage of her own children to fresh scrutiny. It is the sound reasoning of a careful ruler. But sound reasoning is not the same as wise handling, and what follows is the episode's most quietly devastating moment. Corlys, wounded and furious, calls Rhaenyra's 3 eldest sons bastards openly in front of bystanders. The word that shadowed Rhaenyra through 2 full seasons, the accusation men were maimed and killed for voicing, the slander that cost Lucerys an eye's worth of vengeance, and eventually his life, is now spoken aloud in her own court by the most powerful lord in her alliance, and she can do nothing. She cannot punish him. She needs his fleet, his gold, and his name too badly. She cannot ignore him. Too many ears heard it. The scene distills the episode's whole thesis into a single exchange. As a claimant, Rhaenyra could treat the bastardy question as an enemy weapon and answer it with fire. As a queen, she discovers that the same question now lives inside her own house, and fire is no longer an option. Her scenes with Elise are no easier, though they wound in a different way. In the aftermath of Otto Hightower's execution, Rhaenyra attempts a kind of amends with the woman who was once her dearest friend, and the episode gives their scenes a terrible, exhausted intimacy. Elisa's position is unanswerable. She reminds Rhaenyra that she kept every promise she made, she sent Aemond out of the city, and she stayed the hands of the archers and the trebuchet crews who might have brought Rhaenyra's dragons down over King's Landing. Elise delivered the city, in other words, and her reward has been the death of her father. The episode does not pretend there is a way through this. The 2 women circle each other with the weariness of people who have cost each other everything and know it, who remember a friendship neither can retrieve, and who are bound together now by proximity and grief rather than trust. Rhaenyra needs Alesis as a symbol of reconciliation, as leverage over the Greens, perhaps simply as the last person alive who knew her before the crown, and Elise has every reason in the world to wish her ill. What passes between them is reconciliation without trust, which is to say, no reconciliation at all. A truce of mourners. In these paired confrontations with Corlys and with Alis, the episode makes its subtlest argument about power. Rhaenyra's dragons won her the throne, but a throne is held through the loyalty of people, and loyalty is precisely the currency she is running out of. Every ally in her court is someone she has disappointed, bereaved, or refused, and the episode counts the cost of each transaction with an accountant's patience. There is a bitter symmetry here that the show surely intends. The Greens' regime collapsed from the inside, a council of ambitious men pulling in different directions around a weak king, and Rhaenyra watched it happen from across the water. Now, holding the same throne in the same keep, she presides over the early stages of the same disease. Allies, whose interests diverge from hers, grievances that cannot be paid off, and a ruler too depleted to do the constant, tedious work of tending loyalty. The Iron Throne, the episode implies, does not care which family sits on it, it imposes the same arithmetic on everyone. Meanwhile, the episode's one extended departure from the capital delivers the plot's forward motion and its trap. Daemon, flanked by the full remaining strength of Rhaenyra's dragons, meets Ormond Hightower in the field for a parley that plays in the moment as the war's formal ending. The terms are clemency. The fighting is over, Rhaenyra is queen, and if Ormond and his host will bend the knee, they may keep their lives and lands. Ormond, reading the sky above him, reluctantly submits. Then Daemon adds a condition that seems, in the moment, like shrewdness. He will be taking Daeron Targaryen, Ormond's dragon-riding ward and the last of Alysa's sons still attached to an army, back with him. A spare heir with a dragon is a standing threat to Rhaenyra's claim, and removing him from the board is elementary strategy. The scene is staged as a victory, the kind of clean, dragon-enforced capitulation that Rhaenyra desperately needs and that the season has so far denied her. It is exactly the news a struggling new queen would want to hear, which is precisely why it is false. The boy surrendered into Daemon's custody is not Daeron Targaryen at all, but a decoy, a fake produced to keep the Blacks distracted and self-satisfied while Ormond makes his real move. His host has taken the city of Tumbleton and sheltered Daeron's dragon, Tessarion, behind its walls. The reveal recontextualizes the entire hour. The perspective trick that trapped us inside Rhaenyra's head also trapped us inside her assumptions, and the episode's formal daring pays off as dramatic irony inverted. For once, the audience knew no more than the queen, and so the deception lands on us with the same force it will land on her. It is worth dwelling on what the twist says about the state of the war. The Blacks' theory of victory has always been arithmetic. Count the dragons, and the side with more of them wins. Ormond Hightower has just demonstrated that the arithmetic can be beaten with theater. He gave the dragons exactly the spectacle of submission they came for, paid for it with a false boy, and walked away with a fortified city and an intact dragon of his own. Rhaenyra's greatest vulnerability, the episode suggests, is no longer Vhagar or any enemy in the field. It is her own need to believe that she has already won, the exhaustion of a grieving woman reaching for any evidence that the worst is over. The Daemon of it all deserves attention too. That the deception happens on his watch is no accident of plotting. Daemon has always been the Blacks' instrument of decisive force, the man sent when a problem needs to end, and the episode uses that reputation against him. He conducts the parley as a formality, a victory lap with dragons for punctuation, because in his experience the sight of 3 dragons overhead has always been the end of the argument. Ormond understands this about him and plays directly into it, offering Daemon exactly the surrender his self-image expects. The rogue prince, of all people, is beaten not with steel but with a piece of theater aimed at his vanity, and because the episode's structure has kept us inside Rhaenyra's limited view, we share his complacency right up to the moment it is punctured. It also matters that the false prize is Daeron. The youngest of Alysa's sons has been a spectral presence in the series so far, often mentioned and never centered, and the episode converts that long absence into a weapon. A boy nobody on the Black side would recognize on sight is the perfect boy to counterfeit. What has been a running curiosity among viewers becomes, retroactively, a trap the show has been setting for 2 seasons. Tumbleton, a name that readers of Fire and Blood will recognize with a shudder, now sits on the board like a loaded weapon, and the season's back half has its detonator. Taken together, the hour succeeds because it understands something that the wider franchise has occasionally forgotten. The most dangerous enemy in the Dance of the Dragons is not any rival claimant but the throne itself, and the most compelling battles are the ones fought inside a single character. None of it would hold without Emma Darcy, who carries the episode almost single-handedly and delivers what may be the defining performance of the series so far. Darcy renders Rhaenyra more dynamic, more understandable, and more terrifying than she has ever been. Terrifying not because she has become a villain, but because we can trace, beat by beat, the pressure turning a sympathetic woman into something harder and stranger, and we cannot say where the transformation will stop. The devolution never asks for our judgment, it asks for our recognition, and that is a far more uncomfortable demand. Critics have responded accordingly, with some calling it a masterpiece hour, and even the kind of patient, character-first storytelling that Game of Thrones' final season promised and failed to deliver. The comparison is instructive. Where that show's endgame rushed its queen's collapse into a single infamous pivot, this episode slows the same essential story, a Targaryen ruler curdling under the weight of power, grief, and suspicion, down to the granular level of daily governance, and finds in the slowness a tragedy that feels earned rather than imposed. Whether the season can sustain this register remains an open question. Perspective experiments are, by their nature, hard to repeat, and the fake Daeron twist obligates the show to return to its ensemble sprawl soon enough. There is also a real narrative debt coming due. Tumbleton must be answered. Aemond must resurface, and a queen this frayed must eventually make a mistake the story cannot walk back. But as a statement of intent, The Hour is unambiguous, and it clarifies what this season is actually about. The first 2 episodes spent their energy on spectacle, the gullet, the fall of King's Landing, and were, in their way, conventional war television. This episode announces that the war was only ever the prologue. The true subject of Season 3 is occupancy. What happens to a person who finally gets the thing that has organized her entire life and discovers that the thing is a job, a burden, and a slow poison all at once? The episode's cruelest joke remains its title. Rhaenyra is triumphant, and her triumph has delivered her rats in the walls that no fire can reach, the word bastard spoken freely in her own court, an old friend who owes her nothing but grief, a war she believes is finished, and a hostage who is not who she thinks he is. She sat down on the Iron Throne expecting to find power there. What she found instead is the truth every ruler in this story learns too late. The throne does not end the war for legitimacy, it only moves the battlefield inside. The crown is hers, everything else is slipping away.